In the past, we looked at the best current NBA player from every state. Well, now we're going to go through and look at the best all-time from every state to see which of them has brought us the best and worst talent across the board. So here we go. From Alabama, we have Charles Barkley, and there hasn't ever really been too many players from the state because, well, it's Alabama. There was DeMarcus Cousins and Ben Wallace, but of course, no match for the former MVP. It's a big college football state, but in terms of basketball and basketball programs, it's rarely ever thought about. While following that same trend, Chalmers is the only notable player to ever come out of Alaska, and it makes sense. I didn't even know they played basketball at all in Alaska. But Chalmers even went to high school there, and while he was there, at one point became the #2 high school point guard in the entire nation. It's pretty weird and probably one of the least popular basketball states in the country. Now, obviously, Arizona's a little more popular, and from there came former NBA All-Star Sean Elliott, who even stayed in Arizona to play college ball before eventually going to the NBA to play alongside David Robinson on the Spurs, winning a championship and getting his jersey retired. I'm a little surprised more players haven't come from the state, though. I mean, Marvin Bagley's even the only current player from there, and not really any other greats from NBA history aside from Sean Elliott. Over in Arkansas, I don't even know the last time I've heard anything about the state of Arkansas, but surprisingly, they've produced a lot of talented NBA players. Past players like Joe Johnson and Derek Fisher, current players like Mike Conley, but of course none are better than Scottie Pippen. He played in high school and college in Arkansas, and then became a Hall of Famer. The best California NBA player of all time is Kawhi Leonard, and there were so many players to choose from here. California has by far produced the most NBA players with 446, and a lot of current day players too, guys like James Harden, Paul George, Russell Westbrook, Damian Lillard, and Klay Thompson, but none beat out the man that led his team to an NBA title and is one of the best two-way players of all time. On the other hand, Chauncey Billups is the greatest to ever come out of Colorado, and while he was a great player with a great career, he really didn't have much competition to beat out, with only 19 other players having ever come out of Colorado. As for Connecticut, it's a small state, but it still produced 37 NBA players, which isn't too bad. But with that said, it was another easy choice to put Marcus Camby in the spot thanks to his game-changing defense and overall talent. For Delaware, it's a state that's only produced 10 NBA players, with the best being a dude named Walt Hazzard. I've never heard of him before, but it's because he played in the 60s and 70s. He was a one-time All-Star, and for him to land here shows you that Delaware wasn't the best in terms of producing great NBA talent. Washington, D.C. isn't a state, and it's a pretty small area, but it still produced a ton of NBA players and two all-time greats in Kevin Durant and Elgin Baylor, with KD of course taking the spot. And he played all around the D.C. area until he went off to college in Texas. But Kevin was on the path to becoming a top 10 player of all time one day, but if his career keeps going the way it's headed these past few seasons, he's not going to be able to crack the top 10 after all. Florida is another one that's produced over 100 NBA players, with guys like Vince Carter, Tracy McGrady, and David Robinson being at the top of the mountain. But of course, David winds up as Florida's best, mainly because he was dominant on both ends of the floor and brought his team 2 titles, something neither other man was able to do. For Georgia, Walt Frazier was an easy choice, even though Dwight Howard was also born there. With Hawaii, it's just weird to mention NBA players being born there. I've been to Hawaii, and it's not a place you'd think anyone would really be playing competitive basketball. But then again, their best player, Cedric Ceballos, was only born there, then moved away soon after and went to high school and college in California. So I guess that makes sense. Even though Luke Ridnour was only a role player in the NBA, he was the best to come out of Idaho, and that makes sense for it only being a state known for potatoes, which was also why they've only ever produced 5 total NBA players. The state of Illinois had a ton of talent come from it, and this spot could have gone a few different ways. It could have gone to Derrick Rose had he stayed healthy, or even Isaiah Thomas, but Dwayne Wade slightly beats him out considering everything in his career. Overall though, D-Wade did return to Chicago and play 1 season for his hometown team, even though it was kind of a letdown. Overall, Indiana has been a pretty successful basketball state, which makes sense being that Larry Bird was the best one to come out of it. With all the competition in the state over the years, it only makes sense that an all-time great would be produced as an outcome. He was born in Indiana, and it's why he's a part owner of the Pacers today. Now, there hasn't been a ton of talent produced from Iowa, and it makes sense. The overall best though has been Harrison Barnes, and even though he never lived up to his potential that a lot of people had for him, he's still a real solid role player. Not too many NBA players have come out of Kansas though, but for the ones that have, Alvin Adams is definitely best. He was a solid big man for the Suns in the 70s and 80s, but nothing too exciting. For as popular of a college basketball state as Kentucky is, you'd think they'd produce and bring us a lot more NBA players. But we do have a few, including Dave Cowens, who was an NBA champion, MVP, and made the 75th anniversary team, so we can't be too upset. Louisiana has given us Karl Malone and Clyde Drexler, but also Bill Russell, so he takes the spot with no discussion needed. The only notable NBA player from Maine is Duncan Robinson, who in the grand scheme of things is still pretty new to the league, so he saved the state from having no one, and it makes sense. It's such a small state with cold weather and not too much going on. Over in Maryland, the best is Sam Cassell, who's known for his run on the Wolves with Kevin Garnett, where they could never successfully win a title, but at least Sam Cassell has the title of Maryland's best. For Massachusetts, it was between Bill Laimbeer or Nerlens Noel, so Laimbeer obviously takes it. And even though he was one of the most hated players in NBA history, overall he was pretty solid. Magic Johnson then takes the spot for Michigan's best overall player. But Michigan's produced so many stars: Draymond Green, Devin Booker, George Gervin, Chris Webber, and Shane Battier. It's just weird that there's some states where just like nobody is from from there. And there's other states that just happen to have given us 1 to 200 players. It's just starting to feel like what state you're born in can really give you a big advantage on if you're gonna make it to the NBA. Now there was no competition in Minnesota though for Kevin Mchale. Mississippi gave us Spencer Haywood from the 70s, but from the state of Missouri, this spot may be a little controversial. Some people may still give this one to Bradley Beal, but especially considering what we've seen recently, I think it easily goes to Jason Tatum. Beal's been a good scorer for years, but always does it on a bad team, and it hasn't really led his team to any success, while only being a 3-time All-Star. While on the other hand, in just 5 seasons in the league, Jason Tatum's already been a 3-time All-Star and has led his team to many more deep playoff runs. So the best to ever do it for Missouri is a 23-year-old in his 5th NBA season. You really wouldn't expect too many all-time greats to be from Montana because it's known for just being out in the country, and that's the reason their best player is only Phil Jackson, who played in the league 40 plus years ago and only averaged double digits in scoring twice. Pretty much the same with Nebraska, which is why their best player is only 1-time All-Star and Bob Boozer. It's just weird though that in the past 75 years of the NBA, no better player has come along in some of these states. Over in Nevada, Ricky Davis bounced all around the league for years as a role player, but he did it while averaging 20 points a game in a few seasons, so it's not so bad that he's their all-time best player. For New Hampshire, when Matt Bonner's your overall best player, you know you're doing something wrong. He was one of the early stretch fours that could shoot the lights out at times, but he was still only a bench player. Shaquille O'Neal was originally born in New Jersey, so he takes their spot, but because his stepfather was in the military early on, he moved to Germany and Texas where he'd eventually play high school ball and really make a name for himself. New Mexico is really not all that popular of a state for basketball programs or just for people in general, so their overall best player was Bill Bridges, who played way back in the 60s. Michael Jordan's known for being a North Carolina native, but he was actually born in Brooklyn, New York, then moved to North Carolina when he was 5, and it was there that he turned into a basketball god. He played in high school and college there before eventually becoming the GOAT. Now as for the actual best from North Carolina, that spot goes to Chris Paul, and unlike Kentucky, North Carolina is a basketball state that has actually produced a lot of NBA talent, over 145 players to be exact, with the likes of David Thompson, James Worthy, Bob McAdoo, and John Wall. But as for Chris, very few guys in NBA history would have beat him out for this spot. He's been playing 17 years in the league and has been one of the best players in the game ever since. Only 6 players have ever been born in North Dakota and played in the NBA, and Doug McDermott was the best of those 6. And while he was born in the state, he did move away shortly after, became a college basketball superstar, and has been alright since being in the league. The state of Ohio has produced a ton of NBA players in the past, with the 2 most notable current guys being LeBron James and Stephen Curry. Now of course I would say Steph Curry is the better player right now, but since we're basing this off of all time, it goes to LeBron. Over in Oklahoma, Blake Griffin was born there, played college basketball there, and then became the #1 overall pick to the Los Angeles Clippers. And who knows, maybe if he never got drafted to a team in Los Angeles with so many different distractions and would have got drafted to a team like the OKC Thunder, maybe his career would have turned out a little better, because for him to be where he's at today and only be 32 years old is still just weird. And speaking of weird, I hope it's not just me that thinks it's strange finding out Monte Sabonis was born in Oregon and is their overall best player. I would have sworn he was born somewhere overseas, but apparently he was born there while his father was playing for the Trailblazers, so I guess it makes sense. Now the state of Pennsylvania is one of the absolute hardest because it gives us both Wilt Chamberlain and Kobe Bryant, and 2 top 10 players from the same state is amazing. But having to decide between the 2, I get the answer will differ from person to person, but at least for me, I want to go with Kobe Bryant as their best player. For Rhode Island, it's a small state, so Marvin Barnes is their best. Honestly, I don't know who that is. In South Carolina, they've given us talent like Alex English, Jermaine O'Neal, and Chris Middleton, which are all great, but not great enough to surpass the former league MVP and Kevin Garnett. For South Dakota, it goes to former 6th Man of the Year Mike Miller. In Tennessee, this one makes sense. I never knew where Oscar Robertson was originally from. I should have known that he was from a southern state like Tennessee, and because of where he's from, there wasn't a ton of other competition. Sure, there was guys like Penny Hardaway and Lou Williams, but again, that's no contest for Oscar. Coming out of Texas, we have Chris Bosh, Jimmy Butler, Trae Young, and LaMarcus Aldridge, and it's tough, but I'll give this one to Jimmy for now because he's the leader of his teams and makes all of them so much better. While Aldridge never won much, especially on his own, Trae and the Hawks are still bad. Chris Bosh did win championships, but I'm sure if Jimmy was the 3rd option to LeBron and D-Wade on the Heat, he probably would have won a few too. In Utah, Tom Chambers is the guy, while there has literally never been a single NBA player born in Vermont. But Virginia's surprisingly given us a bunch of really solid players, with the top 2 being Moses Malone and Allen Iverson. Oddly enough, 2 guys that were both superstars and played for the Philadelphia 76ers. Take who you want here in this spot, either one is a good choice, but I'll go with AI. In the state of Washington, John Stockton beats out 67 other players that were born there. I'm surprised West Virginia even gave us any NBA players, but not only did it, it gave us one of the greatest point guards of all time in Jerry West. From Wisconsin, we had Latrell Sprewell, who even though he had ego issues, did have some real high spots in his career. Then finally, only 7 total players made the NBA from the state of Wyoming, but the best of the best was James Johnson. And that was a lot of states. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.